Story time about how my best friend was a snake. So a little background information, I was 15 and in 9th grade. And I've been best friends with this girl who we're going to call Callie since 5th grade. Well, fast forward to 8th grade, there was this guy in my class that I really liked. And obviously I told Callie about it because, duh, she is my best friend. And she has never talked to this boy. She never even knew who he was before I had told her about him. And by the way, we're going to call him Jake. Well, eventually him and I started talking and she was hyping us up. She really wanted us to be together so bad. And I was really feeling the love and support. Well, not long after that, I had to move to another town for 3 months because of my dad. So Jake and I, we stopped talking after me being gone for 2 weeks. And of course, not long after that, one of my friends from home texted me and she's like, "Hey, you know Callie and that guy that you were talking to, right? AKA Jake." Obviously, I say yes. For part 2. Part 2 about how my best friend was a snake. So like I said, I had to move away for 3 months because of my dad, and Jake and I, we stopped talking about 2 weeks after I had left. And then I get a text from my friend saying, "Hey, you know Callie and that guy that you were talking to, Jake?" Obviously, I say yes. And then she goes, "Oh, well, they're talking about getting together." And I was livid. I'm like, dude, I've literally been gone for less than a month and you're already trying to get with the guy that I liked. What the actual you know what? So I bawled my eyes out for 2 hours straight. And then I decide that I'm going to confront her. And she literally says to me, she has the audacity to say that she's been in love with him for so long, even before I had told her about him. Which is a lie, because as I told you guys earlier, she didn't know this man. Well, anyways, Jake ended up friend-zoning her, and she didn't even really apologize to me. She said sorry, but she didn't acknowledge the importance of the situation and how it made me feel. She just thought that saying sorry would make it all better.
Story time about how I fell in love with my foster father. Disclaimer is not my story time, was sent to me on Instagram. My mom and dad died in a car crash when I was 2 years old. Trust me, it was terrible, but I was 2, so I don't really remember anything about them. After that, I was sent to live with my grandmother. She was already 82, and she passed away shortly after that. Unfortunately, I didn't have any other family members. I did have an uncle who lived in India, but the court didn't even consider that. This is when I went into foster care. I know that some kids have really terrible experiences, but mine really wasn't that bad. First family I ended up going to adopted me, and they were really good people. I was a single mom with 2 teenage daughters. I was 6 at the time. They really loved me from the beginning. I even started liking school, and I also made a bunch of friends. In fact, I became one of the more popular girls. Fast forward to high school, my adopted mom started dating a guy. Let's call him John. John was in his early 20s, while my mom was in her late 30s. My 2 sisters had moved out and they had their own jobs. They would come visit almost every single day. And when they met my mom's new boyfriend, they loved him, treated us like his real daughters, and he was completely head over heels in love with my mom. Honestly, I couldn't have been happier. But then I started seeing him differently. I don't even know how it happened, but I started developing a crush. At the time, this boy was trying to get me to be his girlfriend. I said yes in the hopes that I would just forget about John. But this is around the time that John moved in with us. My mom and him were so happy. They always laughed, and he just made her feel like the most special woman in the world. I ended up breaking up with my boyfriend because I just knew I couldn't give him what he wanted. This is when my mom and John got married. So this made John my stepdad. I was so in love with him, but I couldn't tell anybody about it. I started drinking with my friends. I came home drunk one night and he was in the kitchen waiting for me. He got really upset when he saw how drunk I was and told me to go straight to bed. This is when I lunged at him and tried to kiss him. He pushed me away and told me to never do that again. He said that he would forgive me just because I was drunk. But then I confessed to him that I was in love with him. He did not mince words. He said I needed to get over it and forget about it. Then he suggested that I should move out. This was a month ago. Can't even look at my eyes anymore. I feel like I've ruined everything, and obviously my mom doesn't know. I mean, how do I forget about him so that I can continue living there? Or should I move out? What should I do?
Story time. My boyfriend cheated on me with the girl best friend. So a little background information, I was 17 and a junior in high school, and my boyfriend and I had been dating for a year. But just a little backstory about when we got together. So there were definitely some red flags that I missed, okay? One of them being that he had a girl best friend. And I don't care what y'all have to say if that makes me insecure or what, but coming from someone who has been the girl best friend, I knew this was not good at all. Especially whenever we first started dating and she was still being super friendly with him, meaning she would hold his hand, she would hang on him 24/7. And when I told him I was super uncomfortable with that and I felt like there needed to be some boundaries, he was like, yeah, I told you what it was whenever we got together. So if you don't like that, then just break up with me. Looking back on it now, that was also a red flag because I feel like he was telling me to break up with him so that way he didn't have to break up with me. Part 2 about how my boyfriend cheated on me with the girl best friend. So like I said, she would still hang all over him and he pretty much told me, if you don't like that, then you can leave. Obviously, I did not want to leave because I liked him and he was my boyfriend. So I just kept putting up with it, and eventually, we got 6 months into our relationship. So at that point, I'm thinking maybe I have a little bit more authority, to be like, hey, I don't like the way that she acts around you. You guys can't hang out like that anymore. And they would hang out alone together. He would take her to dinner. I literally tried telling him that the stuff that they do together is relationship stuff. And he was like, that's not true at all because we did all of this stuff before you and I even got together. So anyways, like I said, 6 months in, I'm like, hey, I don't like the way that you guys are hanging around each other. Once again, he gives me the same excuse. So he pretty much said that he didn't care. And the one night him and I were supposed to hang out, but he canceled on me last minute. And her and I didn't get along, and she never Snapchatted me before, but then I get a Snapchat of her and him making out at his house.
Storytime about how I crashed my ex's wedding and managed to break them up a month later. I'm definitely toxic and vindictive. So when my boyfriend broke up with me, I knew what I had to do. He and I dated for 9 months. And you could say that I was a little overbearing. If you guys saw what this man looked like, maybe you'd understand. He's the type of guy that all the girls want to get with. Not only is he super handsome, but he's also very successful. And he's a great guy. Comes from a great family and he's really close to them. I, on the other hand, grew up in the foster system, so having a family was always my biggest dream. And when I met his family, they took me in right away. His mom and I essentially became best friends. His dad would take me out to dinners and lunch, and they basically adopted me as their daughter. Here's when things started going wrong. I was extremely jealous and I basically didn't let him do anything. Every time he wanted to go out with his friends, I would start a fight. Anytime he would bring up a female friend from the past, I would simply threaten to break up with him. Trust me, I recognized that what I was doing was wrong, but part of me just couldn't control myself. I was willing to do anything to make him stay with me. Eventually, he got really sick of me, started mentioning that he wanted to take a break. So that's when I told him that I was pregnant. Was I pregnant? Absolutely not. Part 2 is up. Storytime about how I crashed my ex's wedding and managed to break them up a month later. The first time he threatened to break up with me, I told him that I was pregnant. It was obviously a lie and he knew it, so he basically still walked out on me. So in order to get his attention again, I decided to go to his family and tell them that I was pregnant. And they all believed me. His mom and dad even invited me to go live with them during the pregnancy. At first I said yes, but then I was like, hold on a second. How am I gonna fake a pregnancy? So to get myself out of that, I told him that I thought I was pregnant, but I actually wasn't. Yep, I'm starting my makeup all over again at this point. I had way too many layers on. During the time we were on a break, I basically followed him around everywhere just to make sure that he wasn't hooking up with any girls. Finally, 2 weeks later, he called me and told me that he missed me. We got back together, but the same thing happened. I was still jealous and controlling, but this time he was becoming more and more jealous. So much so that he started trying to control the way that I was dressing. Around this time, we started having huge fights. He would punch the wall right by my head. I would throw things at him, even threw a knife at him once. But part of me liked that he was so jealous and toxic. He was obsessed with me. And he broke up with me again, and 2 months later, he was engaged. And guess what? His family invited me to their engagement party. Part 3 is up. Storytime about how I crashed my ex's wedding and managed to break them up a month later. That's when I get the invitation for his engagement party. At this point, it seems that my ex's parents thought we separated on good terms. So of course, I showed up to that engagement party. As soon as my ex saw me, he came straight to me and told me to leave. And I told him that I was welcome because his parents had invited me. He gave me a whole speech about how we were over and I needed to accept it. But of course, not one single part of me was willing to accept that. Then he called me an Uber, so I actually did end up leaving. When the wedding comes around, I was the first guest to show up. As soon as his parents saw me, they welcomed me. So I went and sat down at the parents' table. When my ex came out, he nearly fell over. Mind you, this is the first time I'm meeting his wife. I went up to her and told her that I was an ex of his. That's when she looked at me and said, when did you guys date? I said we dated for 9 months. And then she says that they had been dating at the same time. So then a whole bunch of drama goes down. She goes to him and starts slapping him. He starts to cry. And then his parents asked me to leave. So I did. The next month, I followed her everywhere. Finally told me to leave her alone and that they had already gotten a divorce. So my plan worked. Now I'm trying to figure out how to get back with my ex. What should I do?
Storytime about why I will never babysit ever again. So a little background information, I was 17 and a senior in high school. And my parents were super annoyed about the fact that I hadn't had a job since I was 14. So their friends just happened to need a babysitter. So they told me that I had to do it. So fast forward, I go over there super early in the morning and the mom had already left for work. And the dad, who we're gonna call Will, he was just about to leave. And before he walked out the door, he told me that there was a list of things that needed to be done before they got home. So their daughter Autumn, who was 5 years old, she was still sleeping. And I was reading through the list and it was just normal stuff like nap time at 2 o'clock, no pop after 7 o'clock, that sort of stuff. And then it had an arrow pointing towards the back. And when I flipped the page over, it said, by the way, Autumn is scared to bathe by herself, so please get a shower with her. And I was not comfortable with that, so I called my mom and I told her about it, like for part 2. Part 2 about why I will never ever babysit ever again. So like I said, I flipped the page over and it said that their daughter was scared to bathe alone, so I would have to take a shower with her. And I called my mom and I told her about it. And she was like, well, honey, that doesn't sound that weird. Don't you remember when your little brother was scared of the toilet and we would have to take him to the bathroom and stand there with him for 20 minutes while he tried to go to the bathroom? So I was super annoyed that she was even comparing those two situations. Because first of all, that was my little brother. Second of all, this is just freaking weird. So I told her to bring my bathing suit over, and then I did everything on the list. Fast forward, Autumn said that she really liked me, so her parents wanted me to come over and babysit again. So I did, and whenever I was setting up the shower that day, there was a stack of towels sitting on the toilet, and when I picked it up to move it, a camera fell out of the pile of towels as soon as I picked it up, and it was recording. I was really weirded out, but I wanted to show it to my mom, so I Part 3 about why I will never ever ever babysit ever again. So like I said, I picked up the stack of towels and a camera that was recording fell out of it. And while I was home later that night, I was waiting for my mom to get home when I got a call from Will. And if you don't remember who that is, that's Autumn's dad. And of course I wasn't going to answer the phone because I was super weirded out and low-key scared. But then he left a voicemail. And he was like, hey, so, I know you have the camera. And this is kind of awkward, but I'm gonna need it back. I can pay you whatever you want, and I would prefer that we don't tell anybody about this. Sometimes I'm just really amazed at how stupid people are because as soon as my mom got home, I showed her the camera and I let her listen to the voicemail. So my mom called over Autumn's mom. So they called the police, and Autumn's mom kept trying to call Will, but his phone was going straight to voicemail. And she was like, yeah, he begged me not to come over here whenever you called. It's been a week since this happened, and Autumn's dad is currently running from the cops.
Ready with me for my best friend's wedding and story time about how I got fired from a job that she got me because a guy accused me of sexually assaulting him. I guess attempted sexual assault is more like it. Obviously, my beautiful best friend is getting married today. It was actually this past weekend, but I showed up with my hair really clean. Serena and I met when we studied at the same conservatory, Stella Adler Studio of Acting in New York City. This is also where I met my husband, so we've known each other for 10 years. Guys, this was back in 2012. By the way, I completely changed my hairstyle because Serena gave me a gift basket, and in the gift basket, there was this beautiful bow on it. So I decided I needed to incorporate the bow into my hair. I went ahead and started straightening my hair, which I had washed in the morning. Look how shiny my hair looks. Shout out to my K18 shampoo for that. Back to the story. After we graduated from school, I actually did book a few roles. I got the role of playing the girlfriend of Harvey Keitel and the comedian and some other stuff. Then I got married and then I went back to New York and I had no job. Serena at the time was working for a company called S3, like the letter S and the number 3. I'm done hiding from these people, so I am calling them out. Oh, I also started curling the ends of my hair, which unfortunately the curls did not stay, but it still looked pretty. So Serena got me the job, and let me tell you, there were only men working at this office with the exception of one other woman, and Serena and me. So you can imagine it was a very misogynistic place to work at. Men would stare at us like we were Martians, but mostly because they were looking at our bodies. How beautiful does my hair look? Go to part 2. Ready with me for my bestie's wedding, plus story time about how she got me a job that I was fired from for supposedly offering a guy a BJ. Like I said in part 1, working here was weird because there were only men, except for one other woman, Serena and me. Serena is my best friend, by the way, who is getting married today. By the way, this whole filming of this process was super uncomfortable because I didn't have a really good setup, but I did my best. By the way, I tried a new foundation, the Hourglass one, and it was phenomenal. Beautiful. I ended up getting sat next to this one guy. He was the youngest guy in the office, good looking, he was really funny. Everyone told me that as soon as I started working there, this guy completely changed. He was funny, he was talking, he was making jokes. He literally looked happy at the job. Before I showed up, apparently he was not very much like that. Him and I would have really cool conversations. We would talk about movies and all that. But obviously, we're at work, so it was nothing weird. Eventually, we started talking about the women that he dated, which I would give him advice and whatever. It was nothing deep. But then one day, the manager, Gabe, he emails me and tells me that I don't need to show up for work. You guys, I almost pooped my pants. I had a bad feeling. I asked him why, and he said, oh, we're just not that busy today. And the following day, he asked me not to show up again. He just didn't have the balls to fire me. Part 2 is up. With me for my bestie's wedding, plus story time about how I got fired from a job for supposedly sexually assaulting somebody, or attempted. Because my manager at this job called S3 did not have the balls to fire me, he actually asked Serena, my best friend, the girl who is getting married today, who I am getting ready for, yeah, he asked her to fire me. She asked me to meet her at the park, and as soon as I get there, she starts to cry. So I start to cry. Then she tells me that they fired me. And guess what? They didn't even give her a reason. I go home, I'm depressed for the next 2 weeks, I'm crying every single day. But Serena got to investigating. 2 months later, she calls me while I'm in Egypt. She tells me the truth. Apparently, the guy that I sat next to every single day at this job, by the way, his name is Justin, he invented this whole lie about how I would accost him in the kitchen at work, I would offer myself to him, and on several occasions I asked him if he wanted a BJ. at work. In reality, this guy was so in love with me that he couldn't sit next to me at work every day. So he figured the best thing to do to get rid of me was to invent a lie to get me fired. By the way, the day that I got fired, I texted him and he felt so bad. He even offered me money, you guys. All the while, he was the one that got me fired. Should I sue these people? This is the final makeup look for the wedding. I love you guys. Bye.
Story time about the time that I had a thing with my stepbrother. So a little background information. I was 14 and it was the first half of my freshman year. So my dad had recently broken up with my mom and he had different girls in and out of the house 24/7. I mean, he was kind of doing his thing after a 15-year marriage. Well, the one day I'm sitting in the house and he brings this girl Kayla over. She had a few kids herself, but both of them said that they would never date. Well, I thought her son Tyler was extremely good looking. So him and I started talking over Snapchat, and things were going good for quite a while. Well, I would say a few months later, my dad told us that Kayla was coming over with her kids. And I was super confused because he seemed really nervous about it. So her kids and I were all sitting on the sofa, and they sat us down and they were like, we need to talk to you guys. We're gonna call my dad Mike. She goes, Mike and I are dating now, so we all have to get along. The reason why she said that was because she thought that I didn't get along. Part 2 about how I had a thing with my stepbrother. So like I said, my dad and her sat us down and she goes, Mike and I are dating now, da-da-da-da-da. And she was like, so we all have to get along now. Because she thought that I didn't get along with some of her kids and her kids did not respect my dad at all. So like I said, Tyler and I were dating at this point. And I freaked out. I was like, you guys can't start dating because Tyler and I are dating. And Kayla was like, well, that's too bad. You two need to break up because I'm your new mother now. And I'm sitting there like, what the fuck did this bitch say? So I start screaming that it's not fair. Tyler's trying to calm me down. My dad is trying to calm Kayla down. To be honest, my dad didn't really care because I had told him about Tyler and I before the whole situation. I thought Tyler would be really upset at the situation, but he was actually pissed off at his mom. So we broke up. Kayla and my dad dated for a little bit over 2 months. Well, surprise, surprise, Kayla cheated on my dad with her ex. So Tyler and I started dating again. Story time about the girl who left me unconscious in the girls' bathroom. So a little background information. I was pretty young at the time. I was in 7th grade and I was 11 years old. And there was this girl who we're gonna call Jenna. Jenna hated me for absolutely no fucking reason. She would bully me because I had red hair and she would text me literally every day at the same time telling me to off myself and how I was weird and how nobody liked me. One day she randomly started being nice to me. She sat with me at lunch and her water bottle was empty. And she asked if I needed mine filled up too. Stupidly, I said yes. Well, she ended up putting drugs in my water bottle. After like 20 minutes, I started feeling sick, so I went to the bathroom. And I was kneeling over the toilet when everything went black. Well, when I didn't come back from the bathroom, my teacher got worried, so she sent security looking for me. They were banging on my stall. Obviously, I was fucking unconscious, so I didn't answer. So then they called the fire department, the police, the ambulance, were all there. Like for part 2 about the girl who left me unconscious in the girls' bathroom. So like I said, the fire department was there, the police, the ambulance. They called the fire department because they couldn't get the door off. And when they removed it, it fell on me. So I was injured and unconscious. And just a little background information on this girl, who, mind you, was literally 11 years old. She had a 3 criminal record and was recently in prison for 5 days, or juvie, whatever the heck you want to call it, because she brought a knife to school and tried to stab some kid who had called her fat the day before. Anyways, back to the story. I wake up 4 days later. My mom's sitting next to me. They put Abby in jail for 13 years. For suspicion of attempted murder, and she was kicked out of school. And now I'm homeschooled and failing all my classes. I now have seizures because of the drugs that she gave me. So yeah.
Story time about how I ghosted my girlfriend for her sister. Disclaimer's not my story time, send me on Instagram. I, a 24-year-old male, am an asshole. But to be honest, I don't think I can help it. I met my girlfriend in college at a party and we hit it off right away. I asked her to be my girlfriend the very same week I met her. So things moved along really quick. We were dating for 3 months before I met her parents. And I went over to her house and we did the whole thing. But when I met her sister, I fell in love. Her sister was like the male version of me. She likes dirt biking. I like dirt biking. She loves going on solo trips. I do too. We both love skydiving, playing baseball, watching baseball, and my girlfriend, well, she just doesn't have those interests. She's more into getting manicures and pedicures, coloring her hair, making sure she looks skinny in all her pictures, and she always makes me take about 100 pictures before she chooses one to post. So I realized her sister and I were much more compatible. The same day we met, her and I just talked for about 3 hours, while the rest of the family was watching TV. That very same day, she invited me to go on a hike with her and her friends. My girlfriend was actually really happy that her sister and I got along. So I said yes, only to end up making out with her. Part 2 is story time about how I ghosted my girlfriend for her sister. Disclaimer, it's not my story time, it's sending me on Instagram. While my girlfriend was blackout drunk on her bed, her sister and I were making out in the kitchen. I know, I'm an evil man, but I just couldn't help it. That's when I realized that I had fallen in love with my girlfriend's sister over the last 2 weeks. I couldn't believe it myself. That's when I decided to tell her in the kitchen that I couldn't see her sister the same way anymore, and that I kind of wanted to be with her. She told me there was no way that could ever happen and that she would never do that to her sister. Yet she was still making out with her sister's boyfriend. I asked her to tell me how she felt about me, and she basically told me she felt the same way. So over the next few days, I made a decision. I decided to ghost my girlfriend. I didn't have the balls to tell her that I had fallen in love with her sister. I mean, can you blame me? Of course, my girlfriend went nuts trying to contact me, so I ended up blocking her number. She came over to my apartment, but I didn't answer the door. That's when I called her sister up and told her that I was single. But now she's rejecting me and doesn't want to be in a relationship with me. I feel like an asshole because I ghosted my girlfriend and I fell in love with her sister. Now I'm the one ending up alone. Should I get back with my girlfriend or should I try to get with the sister? Story time about how I ghosted my girlfriend for her sister. Disclaimer, it's not my story time, it's sending me on Instagram. When she invited me to go hiking, I instantly had to say yes. But in my defense, I tried to convince my girlfriend to come with us. She said no because she didn't want to get sweaty and she didn't want to ruin her hair. So her sister and I made our way to the hiking place with her 2 friends. During the hike, we had so much fun. Her and I basically walked together for 2 hours and just talked. The longer we walked, the more I fell in love with her. And I could tell that the same was happening to her. We decided to walk ahead of her friends just to get some more privacy. And that's when we started making out. Then she instantly started to cry. She felt really bad for her sister. And I felt bad for her sister. But there was just nothing we could do about it. At least not then. When we got back to her parents' house, we decided not to talk about it or even talk to each other. My girlfriend and I went back to college and I didn't see her sister for another 2 weeks. She finally came over to visit and we decided to go to a house party. And this is when things get even more complicated. At the house party, my girlfriend decided to get really drunk. And she was being a brat. So her sister and I had to take care of her the whole night. When we finally took her back home after she was sick, her sister and I started making out again. Part 3 is up. Story time about how my creepy uncle flirts with me. Disclaimer, this is not my story time, it's sending me on Instagram. I come from a really big family. My mom has 5 sisters and 1 brother, and my dad has 4 brothers and sisters. All of them have their own kids, so I have a lot of cousins. And this means we have a lot of family get-togethers. Every single weekend, someone is hosting a party. We all get together and eat, and it's actually a really nice time. But there's always that one creepy uncle. In my case, it's my mom's brother. He's 46-year-old and has never married, but he's a bachelor. He's got money, so he basically has a bunch of sugar babies. Whenever my family tells him that he needs to get married, he says he'll never get married to anybody. He thinks women only exist for the pleasure of men. When I turned 16, I noticed that he would stare at me a lot. At first, it was just staring. Every now and again, he never did anything really creepy then, but just the staring was enough for me. I never told my mom about it then, not until I turned 18. This is when he started making comments like, wow, you're growing into your body, or wow, you got great hips. He would make comments about how I was growing up, like, ew. He even told my dad that he needed to keep me away from guys because I was growing up really quickly. And because of my curves, men would think that I was a woman. This is when I finally told my mom that he was making me super uncomfortable. She thought it was funny at first, so I avoided him at all costs. Part 2. Story time about how my creepy uncle flirts with me. Disclaimer, this is not my story time, it's sending me on Instagram. When I told my mom that he was making me super uncomfortable, she laughed it off. She thought it was funny. She said, oh, you know how he is. So from that point on, I basically avoided my uncle every time we were at a family event. When I turned 20, this is when things got even worse. He would ask me things like if I was a virgin, or if I had a boyfriend, if I had ever been on dates. And one time he even told me that he would get very jealous if I ended up bringing a guy to one of our family events. One time he complimented me on the dress that I was wearing, so after that, I only wore baggy clothes to family events. The fact that I had to change the way that I dress so that he could control himself makes me sick. I finally told my mom again that my uncle was always bothering me. That's when she told me that the world is filled with men like him, and that all I needed to do was just ignore him. So I told my dad everything. My dad took it a little more seriously and told my uncle that he needed to stop making comments. My uncle just laughed. Part 3 is up. Story time about how my creepy uncle flirts with me. Disclaimer, this is not my story time, it's sending me on Instagram. I finally told my dad and he told my uncle to stop making comments. My uncle just laughed and told my dad that he was overreacting. And that all he said to me was that I was a pretty girl. What a liar. In part 1 and 2, I told you guys that it was getting worse, but here's where it actually gets even worse. Like I said, I have a really big family, so my cousins are growing up too. One of them just turned 13 and my uncle cannot stop staring at her. She's maturing a lot quicker than most 13-year-olds. He's already staring at her. So here's what I did. At the next family event, I sat right next to him. Every time he would stare at one of my cousins, cousins or try to make a comment at me, I called him out for it in front of everybody. I even recorded the things that he said. The fact that I even have to do this at a family event makes me sick. Instead of enjoying my time with my family, I have to sit next to my creepy uncle policing him. Anyway, it's totally worth it though. I'm making sure that my cousins don't feel uncomfortable. After I had enough recordings of him saying nasty things, at the next family event, I showed it to my grandma. I basically played it for the entire family. My grandma told him that he couldn't come to any more events if he was going to behave that way. And of course, he apologized to everyone right away. But not to me, he apologized to my dad. After his half-ass apology, he was let back into family events. I don't think that's enough punishment. Give me some ideas because I think I deserve justice. Creepy uncle.
Okay, so here's a little story time, but it's a little TMI. So I'm really sensitive to like smells. If I smell bad, I know it. And if other people smell bad, I know it. And it bothers me so much. So I was filming a movie in Waco, Texas, and everything was fine. But a few days into the shoot, I started noticing that my armpits were smelling like rotten fruit. It's hard to describe how I smell. I can only compare it to guava. It bothered me so much. The next day I went to wardrobe and started sniffing all the clothes that I had worn the day before, and it all smelled like guava. So I went and picked up the Kopari deodorant. This is a coconut deodorant and it smells so good. When I was doing my research, I realized that this is like skincare for your armpits, and I use skincare on my face and my body. Why don't I do it on my armpits? It's also free of aluminum, baking soda, and it's 100% plant-based. I don't smell like guava anymore, thank God. If you have any embarrassing BO story times, let me know in the comments because I don't want to be the only one.